Hi, my name is Megan Dibble, and I'm the alto section leader for the UUCB choir Luminescence. For the next 5 services, we will be singing hymn number 1003 from the Teal hymnal called Where Do We Come From? This hymn has 4 lines. I'm going to sing each of the lines one time right now, and then I will sing each line 2 times, and I hope that you'll join me. During the services, when you hear this hymn as a round or as a solo, I hope that you will join in any way that feels good to you. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? The second line is, where do we come from? The third line is, mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. The fourth line is, where do we come from? Where are we going? Let's practice. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going?
We gather. We gather, exploring layers upon layers of mysteries and wonders. Wonders that stretch from beginnings to endings and back again. Questions about our universe and the reaches into which it stretches. Questions about our religions and gatherings and what their future holds. We gather and seek meaning and strength. We gather and draw our souls together for this, our shared journey.
Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. My name is Andrea Brown, my pronouns are they, them, and I am your worship associate this week. This is a welcoming congregation, and we are always working on how to better welcome and care for one another. If this is your first time here, we're so glad you've come. And whoever you are, we welcome you in the fullness of who you are. As we begin, we take this moment to acknowledge this church occupies unceded Chochenyo and Muwekma Ohlone land. As community and church members, we continue to benefit from the seizure and occupation of this land. We want to affirm that this statement is not simply performative, but it is deeply felt and a commitment toward action. For more information, please visit uucb.org/indigenous. Please take a moment to prepare yourself and your space for our time together. You might bring a candle and a way to light it so you can join in the chalice lighting at home. Now, let's kindle our flames with the words of Dilman Baker Sorrells. For holy days on which we recall the old stories, we light the flame. For Passover, which reminds us of the courage and strength of those seeking freedom in the past, we light the flame. For Easter, which reminds us that love is our greatest challenge, we light the flame. For gathering together in this sacred space, we light the flame. For the opportunity to be together as a community, to remember the past, to plan for our future, to be alive in our present. Now, please join us in singing our opening song, Morning Has Come. The words will be on the screen.
Morning has come, arise and greet the day. Dance with joy and sing a song of gladness. The light of hope here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home. A new day dawns, once more the gift is given. Wonder fills this moment shared together. The light of peace here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home. Open our eyes to see that life abounds. Open hearts to welcome it among us. The light of life here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home.
Please join with me in saying our covenant. Love guides this church. The quest for truth and justice is its common purpose. To give thanks, listen deeply, speak with care, honor our differences, and seek and grant forgiveness. These things we covenant with one another.
Happy Easter! Good morning. I'm the Reverend Catherine Boyle. My pronouns are she, hers, hers, and I'm the Director of Family Ministry here at UUCB. Before we get into our very special Time for All Ages, we're going to find out why we celebrate Easter today. I'd like to remind all my friends that we are having a very special friend come visit us in RE today at 12:15. So be sure to join us. With that, let's begin. Jesus was a great teacher long, long ago who preached God's love. Jesus taught that we should care for the poor and forgive people who hurt us. In his lifetime, Jesus influenced many people to love one another as they loved God. 12 of those people were called the disciples of Jesus. They traveled with Jesus and listened to him preach day after day. Now, in Jesus' time, the Roman leaders and the Jewish leaders did not like him. They were afraid he would lead a rebellion and upset the way things were. And as Jesus became more and more popular, these leaders planned to kill him. One of Jesus' disciples, named Judas, betrayed Jesus and helped the leaders with their plan. The night before Jesus' death, he was celebrating the Jewish holiday of Passover. He celebrated at a Seder with his 12 disciples. The next day, Jesus was arrested, and then he was killed. What happened after Jesus died began the religion that we know today as Christianity. Many Christians believe that after Jesus was killed, he rose from the dead and went to heaven. Many Unitarian Universalists see this story differently. Many years ago, a religious educator named Sophia Foz explains in a UU way what happened after Jesus' death. Here is how Reverend Foz told it. The people who followed Jesus were brokenhearted after he died. They struggled to understand why God had allowed their teacher to be killed. Surely someone so connected to God, so overflowing with goodness, did not deserve the punishment of a criminal. As these people gathered day after day in each other's homes, they began to recall the wonderful experiences they had with Jesus. They told one another of the times when Jesus was wise, and the times when he was kind. They talked of the tone of his voice. The look on his face would come back to them so vividly. It felt as though Jesus were right there in the room with them. Some of these people had dreams in which Jesus seemed so real that the dreamers could not tell whether they had been asleep or awake when they saw him. Some declared positively that they had seen Jesus again, that he had talked with them. And the rumor spread that Jesus had actually come out of his coffin, and that 2 of his disciples had seen him, and that several of the women had talked with him, that they would only see him for a few moments, and then he would mysteriously disappear again. Finally, several of them dreamt that they saw Jesus rise from the earth higher and higher until he disappeared entirely. They believed he had gone to heaven to be with God. And then, after that, their dreams of seeing him and talking with him stopped. The people who had these experiences believed that Jesus was different from other people. Some believed that Jesus was so holy and great that he would come back to earth and save the world. That is one reason Christians call Jesus the Savior. The years passed by, and the people who knew Jesus died, and their children and their children's children also died. But Jesus did not come back. And it has been over 2,000 years, and Jesus still has not come back. And there are those who still hope that he will come back to life again. Others, including Unitarian Universalists, believe that this Jesus will never again live on earth, that his body is not coming back, but his spirit never needs to die. His spirit is in his words and his deeds, which still give us wisdom and inspiration today. For example, when he was alive, Jesus taught the Golden Rule, treating others the way that we wish to be treated. Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount, where he said that people who are poor, hurt, and struggling are loved by God, and therefore we must love them too. When someone's physical body dies, the people around them who loved and valued them will keep their memory alive, just like the followers of Jesus have remembered his teaching and his spirit long after his death.
Many nights we've prayed with no proof anyone could hear. In our hearts a hopeful song we barely understood. Now we are not afraid, although we know there's much to fear. We were moving mountains long before we knew we could. There can be miracles when you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. Who knows what miracles you can achieve? When you believe, somehow you will. You will when you believe. In this time of fear, when prayer so often proved in vain, hope seemed like the summer birds too swiftly flown away. Yet now I'm standing here, with heart so full I can't explain, seeking faith and speaking words I never thought I'd say. There can be miracles when you believe. When you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. Who knows what miracles you can achieve? You can achieve when you believe. Somehow you will. You will when you believe.
Where do we come from? Where are we going? Who are we? The mysteries and riddles of life surround us and stretch into the far reaches of our imaginations. For our visual meditation, we'll look in and around some of the sacred spaces and places around our world. Across the world, we seek wisdom and truths and meaning in spaces that are filled with beauty and with wonder. I invite you to gaze in and around these today. We now enter the time in our service that we make for our hearts and our spirits, for our cares and concerns for one another. We lift up and hold the joys, the sorrows, the cares, and the challenges we may each be facing. During our time of silence this morning, I invite you to share any joys or sorrows or significant milestones of your own in the comments. I invite us all to hold these cares in the compassionate embrace of this loving community.
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going?
I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian house. Since then, I've walked away from that religion. For a long time, things were okay. But sometimes, around holidays like this one, I wrestled with rage. I struggled hearing one of Christianity's foundational stories until I read some things that made me pause and ask, what are we bringing to life when we tell the story of Jesus's life and death? For those who follow Jesus, which is some of us, and those who live in a world shaped by Christianity, which is all of us, we have a choice. We can tell our stories to make those in power comfortable, or we can tell our stories to create a life focused on recognizing our wholeness, the stories that build the dignity of our most vulnerable, our oppressed, our marginalized. When Jesus lived, he was a Jewish man living under the rule of the Roman Empire. The parables he told were an intra-community dialogue about how to live life under this oppression, how to build and care for each other while living opposed to power. Jewish writer Jessica Price points out that the stories of the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost sons were about how you don't leave anyone behind. I was so excited when I heard this. It reminds me of so many disability activists today who talk about collective liberation, where no one gets left behind. Jesus died because the Roman Empire, the empire invading, occupying, enslaving territories and people, that empire wanted him dead. But this story too can be life-affirming. James Cone, a Black Christian theologian, wrote in his book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, that the cross speaks to oppressed people in ways that Jesus' life, teachings, and even resurrection do not. For Christians, Cone wrote, the cross places God in the midst of crucified people, in the midst of people who are hung, shot, burned, and tortured. But these stories, the stories of how to live within but not a part of empire, how to live unaligned with power, were not the only focus of this young religion. About 30 years after Jesus' death, the Jews rose up against the Roman Empire. 4 years later, in 70 CE, Common Era, the empire crushed the uprising, destroyed the Second Temple, and scattered the Jewish people to the winds. Modern scholars believe that the Book of Mark, the oldest of the 4 Gospels, was written just after 70 CE. Followers of this young religion had a choice. They could stand with the people of their founder, stand aligned with the oppressed, or they could make the story of Jesus safe for empire. comfortable and accessible for those aligned with power. I think, for a time, as this young religion spread, they probably tried to do both. Christianity grew among people who were neither Jewish nor in the upper echelons of the Roman Empire. There was lots of other people the Roman Empire conquered. But in this struggle to breathe life into stories about how to live, support each other, and be whole under oppression, they also told stories about how they were not like them, those people over there, the Jews who the Roman Empire crushed. These different stories built different relationships to power, a tension that didn't last long. Around 313 CE, the Roman Empire converted to Christianity and ordered an end to persecuting Christians. He also convened a big meeting where Christian leaders met and decided what this new religion was about. They took a wide faith with many meanings, stories, and interpretations and collapsed it into a much narrower one. Conveniently, the Christianity those leaders chose became the tool the Roman Empire used to shape and hold power for another 1,000 years. What do we resurrect when we tell the story of Jesus' life and death? What comes alive when these stories swirl throughout our culture? For me, with my fundamentalist Christian childhood, I grew up drenched in stories of misogyny, white supremacy, authoritarianism, and much more. These stories were useful to those who already had power. But the other stories, like those from Jessica Price about leaving no one behind, James Cone, and being with the oppressed, and many others, learning those stories and the history of a young Christianity helps me let go of some of the rage I've lived with for so long. We all can tell stories useful to those in power, useful to those who would do harm. This is not a problem isolated to Christianity. But we can also tell the stories that bring to life dignity and wholeness for the vulnerable of us. We can tell stories that stop power and empire from seeming natural or inevitable. So what do we resurrect when we tell our stories? Who gets to live with our stories? What people do we become? Amen, and blessed be.
Happy Easter and Good Pesach, which is the Jewish holiday and observance of Passover. You know, it's actually a time of the year when many of the religious traditions of the world have significant holidays. For the Christians, it's Palm Sunday and Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Passover often falls at about this same time of the year also. The Hindu celebration of color holiday Holi was this past week. And the Muslims observed Laylat al-Bara, the Night of Records and Night of Forgiveness, also known by some as Barat Night. Muslims believe that on this night, Allah writes the destinies of all people for the coming year, whether an individual will live or die, find hardship or fortune, and whether they will be eligible to make the pilgrimage. Many Muslims try to stay awake the entire night in prayer and worship. The Buddhists also celebrated their second most significant holiday of the year, Magha Puja Day, when Buddhists celebrate the creation of an ideal and exemplary community. And the pagans celebrated Ostara in the past couple of weeks as well, the holiday where much of the Easter imagery of rabbits and chicks and eggs comes from. It is a holiday-filled time of the year. By way of explanation, in case you're wondering why I'm talking about various religious holidays today, Unitarian Universalism draws from many sources for our faith, and one of them is, quote, the wisdom from the world's religions which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. That's why you'll hear words and wisdom from many religious traditions here at UUCB. And it's also, though, more than just a bunch of holidays going on right now. Major holidays from religious traditions are often centered on a core tradition or on a story that is core and central to that religion. Many of this week's holidays are no different. The story of Passover and their exodus from Egypt is one of the defining stories of the Jews, as is the Passion story for Christians. That is the story of the end of Jesus' life and his resurrection, which Easter is celebrating. In many ways, stories are central to what we know about how things came about and how they influence and shape our identities in the present and in the future. That's what our worship series is about this month, the stories of how things began, and then our questions and stories about where we might be going from here. Last week, we took a look at some big stories and big questions as we talked about the entire cosmos, the beginning of the universe, and some theories on how the universe may end or rebound. Today, we're going to look a little more earthward in our journey. Given all of these formational and foundational stories from different religions being celebrated right now, let's take a look at religion and at the church, where we came from, and some thoughts on where we may be going. Now, whether UUs talk about Jesus at Christmas time and Easter varies a bit from congregation to congregation and from preacher to preacher. But when Brian ever so carefully asked me if I'd be talking about Jesus on those holidays, I said yes, I do every year. But since we're looking at beginnings and endings this year, I want to take a slightly different perspective and tell you about someone that we don't often talk about during major Christian holidays. Now, one could say that Jesus was not the first Christian and that Christianity didn't start with him. Jesus was not a Christian. Jesus was Jewish, and he was more of a teacher and a rabbi, as well as an activist, advocating for change and resistance. And the faith-based healing that he did was actually quite common across many beliefs during his time. No, Jesus was not the first Christian, nor did he start Christianity. That honor, at least in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, that honor belongs to Paul. So, this Easter, let me tell you a little bit about Paul, or as his name first was, Saul, and his conversion when he became ultimately Paul. After Jesus' death and resurrection and ascension, as the story goes, his disciples were going around and sharing his teachings and healing in his name. Now remember, Jesus had also been seen as an agitator against the state and had in fact been executed because of this. So it's no surprise that his followers, who kept running around and talking about the same things and doing the same thing, were also getting persecuted. One of the leads in their persecution was a Roman named Saul. Now we're talking of this persecutions, we're talking executions, official notices to break up gatherings, and chasing down anyone he could to throw them in jail or whatever he could do. And he was committed to it. So as it goes, one day he had gotten some more notices to go to Damascus and do some more persecuting of these Jesus followers, and he was on the road on his way to Damascus, when he was surrounded by a blinding light, and a voice said to him, "Saul, why do you persecute me?" The voice identified itself as Jesus and told Saul to go find a man named Ananias. And did I also mention that this blinding light that happened made Saul blind all of a sudden, out of the blue? Well, about the same time, a voice had also talked to Ananias, who lived in Damascus, and told him to go find Saul. So Saul stumbled into Damascus, had 3 days of being cared for in someone's home, and then Ananias came and found him. He laid hands on him, and Saul's blindness was cured. Well, this was Saul's conversion experience. He was then baptized and began preaching Jesus' teachings himself. Now, this still isn't quite the beginning of Christianity, both because the other Jesus followers didn't quite trust Saul. I mean, I don't blame them, since up until that point, he had been one of the most vocal and violent persecutors of them. And it was still an organic movement. Saul, who changed his name to Paul, is the one who changed that. And yes, it helped that he was a person of privilege. He was a Roman citizen, he could cross borders and travel freely, and his interactions with authorities was influenced by that too. But what all this meant, is that it let him do what he did. Paul was Christianity's first church planter. He was a church organizer. That's why I call his story the beginning of Christianity. All of the letters in Christianity's New Testament, they were all letters Paul wrote, and his correspondence with the many churches he had planted and went back and forth visiting and helping along. Now, just while we're here, fun fact, that famous 1 Corinthians 13, the chapter on love that gets shared in so many weddings and the like, it wasn't about romantic love. It was about church conflict and how to be in right relationship with each other. Talk about covenant right there in the New Testament. Just something to chew on. Religions usually have an initial teacher, and they definitely have an initial connector and networker, and well, church planters. These might be the same person, or they might not. The initial teachers or visionaries are usually the ones that we think of, though. Those are usually the names that are known. The Prophet Muhammad, Siddhartha Gautama, Unitarianism's Michael Servetus, Judaism's Abraham and Jacob and Moses. And yes, there are some women in there too, thank goodness. Mary Baker Eddy, for instance. Then there are the organizers and the institutionalists. Moses was the visionary. His brother Aaron made it happen, and his sister Miriam organized the women. And yes, we do have Michael Servetus and King John Sigismund, who were early anti-Trinitarian voices in Unitarianism. But have you heard of Giorgio Biandrata? Without Biandrata, our faith would have had a very different path, if at all. Now, you do see him. He's one of the faces in the background of that famous painting of King Sigismund's signing of the Edict of Torda, the first official declaration of religious tolerance in the world. Biandrata, he's in there. He's a background figure. He was the networker, though. He was the one who carried Unitarian thought throughout Europe. See, he traveled and instigated. He was an instigator, too. He instigated dialogue and debate and spreading Unitarian ways of thinking every single place he went and every town he went. He is the one who essentially brought Unitarian ideas to Transylvania, which ultimately converted the young king. Biandrata was the networker and the connector. All of these founding stories. It's more than just tiny debates and living room conversations. These religious traditions grew and spread around the world, even more so in our globally connected current reality. But of course, they didn't just grow and spread and all is happy and well. There were plenty of twists and turns and splits and mergers and fractures, with the resulting wide variety of denominations and traditions today. And if you look around online, there are many an infographic or picture of a tree, a very, very branched tree, showing the various twists and turns of each one today. And interestingly, every one of those twists or turns usually also has a significant story, which becomes another one of these core stories that goes with it. That is where we've come from. Now, the reality remains is that humans are fundamentally spiritual beings. We ask big questions and seek answers and meaning, both with others and through our own introspection and exploration. Religion is frankly here to stay in some form or another, although I believe the forms that it ends up taking 100 years from now will be nothing like we could have predicted. It is also totally human to wonder what the future will look like, not only 100 years from now, but 5 years from now, or 10 or 20. So let's pull out our non-existing magical crystal ball and take a look. What will organized religion look like in the future? Now, there are many who say human culture goes through significant shifts every 500 years or so, and they point out that we are totally due for one of those such shifts. Organized religion is also due for one of those shifts, particularly Western religion. Do you know what happened almost exactly 500 years ago? 500 plus a couple. That's when Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses and ignited the Protestant Reformation. That was a significant turning point for Western organized religion. We are well due for another huge turning. Problem is, these huge turnings are never comfortable to go through, especially for those who are invested, at least to some extent, in the way things are at the moment. And to some extent, I'd say virtually every member of a current church is invested in some way. It's not comfortable because it is a virtual unraveling of the way that things are and weaving together in many new ways. Changes in Western organized religion, they are happening, they are about. Now, they seem to happen in Europe before the United States, although it is similar changes that happen in both places, just on a delayed time frame. In Europe, religious affiliation and participation has been in steady decline for decades, and the number of religiously unaffiliated has been growing. Those folks are affectionately known as the nuns, not N-U-N-S, but the N-O-N-E-S. I love it, the nuns. That trend has held in the United States too, and you can look up the current percentage. It keeps on getting higher every single year. And there are many generational trends too throughout the world. There is a rapidly growing number of folks who consider themselves culturally associated with kind of the dominant religion, culturally Buddhist or culturally Hindu or culturally Jewish, culturally associated with some of the traditions, but would not consider themselves to be a practitioner of that faith tradition. How many now adults who were raised as Unitarian Universalists as children are still connected with the faith and current practitioners? Not nearly as many as I would like to say are. The giving trends in different generations are clear too, as are the way that we do things. The churches in the United States operate in far different ways than we did 50 years ago, or 20 years ago, or, well, frankly, 1 year ago. The pandemic and sheltering in place and rapid shifts in the way we do church have certainly changed us a good deal. But I'm afraid there is the overall sense of looking forward to getting back to the way we used to do things. Now, yes, there is some sense of getting to re-engage in settings and groups that we did back in the day, that day being back in 2019. But I'm afraid that we're going to miss the opportunity for what it is. When I was taking a big picture look at the challenges and shifts that the pandemic had brought for religious organizations worldwide, I didn't see it as a challenge to be overcome, but rather as an accelerator for the changes and trends that were already happening. Instead of looking backwards as the goal, what would it look like to look forwards instead? Say into what church will look like 10 years from now, and aim towards that. Human engagement as a whole is changing so fundamentally, as are the ways we gather, the ways we share ideas, the ways we do just about anything. I don't have to look much further than my teenage daughter to see stark differences, even from just 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. And the kids in 20 years, I have no idea what it's going to look like for them. I don't know if anyone really does. But that is who church and religion of the future is for. So, what will the future of religion and the future of the church look like? Will anything remain the same? Well, one thing will, and that's the thread that I want to lift up as we close. What is the thread that remains through all of the twists and turns and mergers and fractures of the past? The stories. That's what. They remain. They get added to and reinterpreted and retold in different ways, but they are still there. The core stories of each religious tradition, also the core stories for individual religious communities. They are part of the identity and they remain. The challenge is for us to let everything else shift and only hold on to the threads that we have to. Change will happen, and growth and renewal. The question for us is, what will the resurrection look like on the other side of it? And what fun we'll have taking steps together towards what that future might be.
We take time now to remember that UUCB needs our support to realize our shared visions for loving community, spiritual growth, and social justice. So we invite you to our offering. Each week, half of our offerings are shared with a good neighbor organization who needs our financial support, and will continue to practice generosity with them during these difficult times. This month, our good neighbor is the Bay Area Outreach and Recreation Program. BORP. Bay Area Outreach and Recreation Program works to provide the health, independence, and social integration of people with physical disabilities through sports, fitness, and recreational programs. At BORP, they believe that sports and recreation provide a path to greater achievement to which all people should have access, and they continually strive to make this a reality. Our offerings are received with gratitude. More details on how to give electronically will appear on your screen as our offertory begins. Thank you. Please join me in dedicating our offering. We dedicate our offerings and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service. It's always so good to be together in praise and song. Before we shift to our virtual coffee hour on Zoom, I'd like to encourage you to stay informed about and involved in all that's going on in our congregation by exploring our website, uucb.org. Among other things, you can find a link in news to the week ahead, our weekly email newsletter, which contains information about upcoming activities. Here's a couple of highlighted announcements. Today at 12:30, the Literature, Film, and Drama contingent is hosting a facilitated discussion about the book It's Time to Talk and Listen: How to Have Constructive Conversations About Race, Sexuality, Ability, and Gender in a Polarized World. Everyone is welcome, whether you've read the book or not. You can find a link to the Zoom in the week ahead. Next, a quick reminder that we're having 2 awesome personal theology talks coming at 9:30 a.m. the second Sunday, that's next week, and the 4th Sunday. Hannah Matt will talk about how to thrive during pandemic times, and on the 4th Sunday, Sue Ellen Parkinson will explain her experience as an artist following the legends of mystics. Now, please join me in singing hymn 283, Spacious Firmament on High.
The spacious firmament on high, with all the blue ethereal its birth, whilst all the stars that round it burn, and all the planets in turn, confirm the tidings as they roll, that spread the truth from pole to pole. What glorious solemn silence all who round the door terrestrial ball. What glory of voice or sound amid their radiant orbs be found? In reason's ear they all rejoice, and utter forth a glorious voice, forever singing as they shine, the hand that made us is divine.
For all those who celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, may this day be another affirmation of divine love and promise. For those who see the eternal story of new spring and life beginning anew, may you breathe deeply a season of promise and hope. For all experiencing despair or hopelessness, may you find a doorway to light and warmth that offers you freedom. For all of us, together we can do what no one isolated person can. Rolling the heavy stone aside reminds us that we are far more powerful together than ever could be on our own. Our offering of strong hands to help our prayers made real. Let us move forward together in love. And remember, you're never all alone. Blessed be.